Podcast City Network.
What is up, beautiful people? Welcome to episode 177 of this here little show called the Nest Podcast. I am the People's Champ, Brandon Brewer, for at least another week or so. And joining me is my co-host, the Zach Bill. Zach, what's up, my man? How you doing?
Hey, what's going on?
Not much. You notice I said for the next week or so, because there's a good chance in our fantasy football league that I might not hold on to this belt much longer. We are playing against one another in the semifinals in the fantasy football league right now. I do have a slight projection to win, but I do have to have guys perform tonight on Monday Night Football. And then whenever we get to the finals, whichever one of us happens to limp through this round and make it into the finals, looks like we have a beast waiting for us.
Yeah, it's rough. And especially because lots of guys have gone down because of the COVID protocols and other injuries and stuff. And you and I talked about it in our text messages that what a terrible time for fantasy owners for a COVID outbreak to hit the NFL is fantasy football playoffs. And that's exactly what's happened.
And it's almost like the whole season was great up until this point. And then as soon as it switched over to be playoff time, it was like, okay, now it's going to suck for everyone. And I know a lot of people have experienced the hardships and just the outright pain that's been associated with this COVID and the NFL protocols and all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. It's terrible. I was very, very lucky that Tyreek Hill was able to actually play because he was out for a while, but he was vaccinated. So he was able to come back 3 days if he had negative tests or whatever. And I picked up a guy off the waiver wire. And of course he went down too. So had Tyreek not been able to play, I would have just been screwed, I think.
I think you would have been able to plug in Adam Thielen, who you still left on your bench because he was questionable and all that stuff. Thielen actually did end up scoring more points than Tyreek Hill this week, so maybe it would have been. But I thought for sure Tyreek was going to go off whenever it was announced that he was playing. I knew Travis Kelce wasn't going to be in there, so I thought, well, Tyreek's going to be the man. Turns out Gore was the guy that carried the bulk of the load for the Chiefs in that win. But oh well. That's something you can't really plan for. You can't really expect. I played this week without one of my big weapons, Austin Eckler. And because he wasn't in the lineup to kind of keep the momentum going there for the Chargers, Keenan Allen also had a pretty terrible game. So that was big hits on my fantasy squad as well. Of course, I've lost all of my wide receivers that I started the season with. I lost D-Hop. I lost Chris Godwin last week. So, yeah, it's been a very difficult couple of weeks for both of our fantasy squads.
Yeah, for sure. Just an absolute rough end to the season. And then to try to, like you said, limp into the playoffs is difficult. So I wish you the best because I'm pretty sure we're about done with our game. You've got 3 guys to play tonight and you only need 15 points. So, I mean, yeah, you have been screwed this season. So anything's possible still, but I think the odds are in your favor on this one.
Yeah. Like Jared said in our group chat earlier, if Kamara, Parker, and Gesicki don't get at least 30 points, then there's a big problem going on in tonight's game. So they should be able to at the very minimum get 15 and push me over, but I don't know how that really bodes for going up next week against Harvey's team because he's pretty solid.
Yeah, it's looking rough. So what can you do?
Oh, Big Dog's headed to the finals in both of his fantasy leagues, so good job for him. Congratulations. I know that's a big accomplishment to be able to manage 2 teams in the same season. And Janice is I think this was his first year in the playoffs, and he made it to the semifinals. So good job to him as well. Although he did make a real questionable decision in our league, at least by benching Patrick Mahomes in the semifinals and playing Trevor Lawrence. That's pretty questionable in my book, but
huge head scratcher there. But he did pull off a magical upset in beating Justin's team. That was the best record in our league. So yeah, hats off for that one.
Yeah, he was the 8th seed in our playoffs, and he upset the number 1 seed. Kind of, I guess, made Harvey's path to the championship game a little bit easier.
Yeah, he sure did.
It is what it is. Let's talk a little bit about Week 16 of the NFL season, Zach, before we go completely off the rail and just make this a fantasy football episode. Week 16, it another one of those weeks where it was impacted by COVID. We talk about it for fantasy and how it impacts us directly, but it's also impacting these actual teams and these players that are out on the field who are getting plugged into positions that they've never played before. Maybe they're making their first ever start because so-and-so's on a COVID list or whatever the case may be. And we saw some pretty interesting head-scratching games. The Browns, a team that's sub 500 now, they took it to the Packers and barely lost that game, had a shot to win it. Of course, and lost in all of that game on Christmas Day was the fact that, what stole the show really is the little logo of the Browns being mistaken for a rabbit with a walker. And that kind of took away from the fact that it was such a close game. But that was a really good game that we got to watch there.
Yeah, it was. And I think that was another huge heartbreaker for Cleveland fans. There was a questionable pickup of a flag against, I think it was a hit on Baker or something along those lines. That was a questionable decision. And man, it just, I hate when the referees get in the way of good games like that, because I think coming into that game, a lot of people were writing the Browns off, and Baker was not good, but they were still in it, which, I mean, that says something to the entirety of that team. And man, they fought hard, but it just wasn't enough to finish the deal. And they've just had yet another heartbreaking season. Sucks.
Yeah, no, it does suck. And it kind of speaks to what Jerome was saying in his comment here. Chubb was a beast, as we've grown accustomed to seeing from Nick Chubb. But what do you think about Baker? Is he the long-term solution for the Cleveland Browns, or is this a guy that they should really take a pass on?
I don't know how serious his injury was, but I've heard reports that he's been injured for several weeks. So I think you do have to take that into account. But at the same time, if you're injured and you can't play up to the level that you need to play to be competitive, then you should go on the IR, and you shouldn't be a hindrance to your team. Now, they might not have an answer in their second string quarterback, but I think if you want to be a legitimate starting quarterback for the long term for your team, your health has to come into that at some point. So I don't know whose decision that was or whatever, but if it is true that his health was why he wasn't as successful this year, then I think that's a little bit on him for not saying, hey, look, I'm injured. I can't play properly. I need to take some time and heal my injury. And if that doesn't really have anything to do with it, if he was just crappy regardless, then I think they should start looking elsewhere. And I think there's some definite quarterbacks out there that could really find some success with that Cleveland organization. Even without OBJ, I think they have a solid wide receiver core. They may need a piece or two on that, but you can always rely on that running game. And Nick Chubb obviously is a beast. And I think the fact that they have Kareem Hunt to help him with that workload makes their running game very, very good. And if you can throw a quarterback in there that can feed off of that, I think they'd have a lot of success. I think Baker has really driven down his price, which may or may not keep his job there in Cleveland, because they could afford him a lot easier if he's cheap. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. I think if they're serious about trying to be a competitive team, they should probably look elsewhere, because I don't think he's the answer there. I mean, not even just judging off of this year. he's never really been great. He's always had issues with the primetime games and just managing those big time games. And he's lucky that he has good running backs to carry him. So I guess we'll see what they think.
No, I agree with you that I don't think that he's necessarily worth a huge extension. Right now he's a guaranteed for 2022 to get $18.8 million. So if he does sign any sort of an extension or anything like that, it will put him up over the $20 million range per season. And I frankly don't think that he's worth that. I think he's getting paid about what he's worth, between 15 to 18 million. He'll go out there, he'll make some good plays for you, he'll win some games for you, but he's also going to lose a lot of games for you. This game in particular, he threw 4 interceptions and the game was only a 2-point game. I don't know if that speaks more to the fact that the Browns could have won this game, or the fact that the Packers wanted to lose this game, because they should have absolutely ragdolled the Browns with 4 takeaways, and it just shows they weren't able to capitalize on those turnovers. But the quarterback situation in the NFL is going to get very interesting this offseason, because we've got guys who, for the first time in many, many years, could be on the move. The rumblings out of Seattle are that Russell Wilson isn't going to be the man there next season. Of course, we don't know what's going on with the Desean Watson situation. If any of them get picked up by, say, the Miami Dolphins, then that puts Tua on the move. Or if they get brought into another team somewhere, that means another quarterback is going to be on the move. So, we got to kind of wait and see if we're the Browns. I know, like I just said, they have Baker Mayfield under contract for at least another year. So maybe they do sit back and wait and see and ride it out with him. But it will be very interesting to see what happens. We got Jerome commenting, what about Huntley? Might be an interesting addition to their offense. I'm not so sure that I want to rush into this one just yet, because we've only seen him for one game for the Ravens, replacing Lamar Jackson. Yeah, he did fine, but do you want to stake your entire future on one performance? I don't really think so. Right. If I'm the Browns and I'm going to give anybody an extension, I think I look to try to make a deal with the Philadelphia Eagles and bring Gardner Minshew in.
Yeah, I think he would be a great fit there. He's never really had that solidified starting quarterback role. He's always kind of been the guy that can fill in for somebody, or when someone starts screwing up, he can come and pick up the pieces. I'd love to see what he's capable of when he is told from the jump, this is your team, this is your offense, you're running it, we trust you, and see what he can do. And I just have to think that he would have some success there. I could be wrong. There might just be, the effect of they don't know how to defend against him whenever he's just brought in like he has been in the past, and maybe that's why he has success. But I think he deserves a shot with a team, because he's shown in the past that he is a good quarterback, and just for whatever reason has always kind of had to play that second fiddle role. So I would love to see him get a shot. I mean, I think if I were one of these quarterbacks that wants to move, say you're Aaron Rodgers or you're Russell Wilson's, I think Cleveland is a great spot to go, because you don't have to start from the ground. They have good offensive players and defensive players. It seems like they finally have a good head coach. I think you could go there immediately and have an impact, and you wouldn't have to wait 2 or 3 years for them to get you some pieces and to figure out the team. I think if a top tier quarterback wants to go there, they could immediately be in, maybe not playoff contention, but I definitely think, or rather Super Bowl contention, but I think they could be a playoff capable team with a top level quarterback.
No, I definitely agree. And, we talk about it extensively with the Sportszilla podcast guys, that there are only a handful of quarterbacks in the league that we feel like are capable of elevating a team to that Super Bowl tier. Yeah. And Baker Mayfield definitely isn't one of them. So if you're going to make a push for that next tier, you've got to bring in one of these quarterbacks that are at that level. It would be interesting to see. The AFC North it's gotten more interesting. because Joe Burrow is trying to ascend the rungs to be one of those quarterbacks that can take his team to a Super Bowl. And with performances where he's throwing up 525 yards passing, the fourth most in NFL history, those type performances tend to stand out whenever you're talking about guys that could lead a team like that. He put the entire team on his back and carried them for that one. And Cincinnati's good there in that AFC North. So it's going to be a competition for the Browns for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why I like the idea of picking up Gardner Minshew for the Browns. But I think if you really do want to be playoff competitive, you're going to have to try to pick up one of the higher level quarterbacks, because like you said, Burrow as emerging as one of those quarterbacks. I mean, you look at that performance, it's the exact opposite of what Baker Mayfield put out on the field. I mean, Joe Burrow just lit up the scoreboard, and 500 yards is so much for a quarterback in today's league. I think it is obviously a passing league, but I also think a lot of guys are mobile and they like to run a lot and stuff. And that's just a huge game for a kid. So it's definitely going to be competitive. And I think there's a lot of questions in the AFC North. You know, what are the Steelers going to do? What are they going to be like next year? What are the Ravens going to be like? Lamar Jackson is now a bit of a question mark because of this injury. And I don't know. It's going to be a very interesting division, which once was a very one-sided division because there was a lot of crap teams in that division. Bengals and Browns mostly were not great for the last however long. And the Bengals have almost emerged as the front runners now, which is crazy to say.
Yeah. I put it up on the screen. The big dog saying that he was very disappointed in the Steelers. And we talked about it last week. He and I did that. They just haven't looked like the same Steelers that everybody is used to seeing. You know, they've got the TikTok drama and all that stuff, and all that. Lost in their season is the fact that Najee Harris, a rookie, is on the verge of hitting 1,000 yards rushing. He's been out there balling, doing everything he can to try to move the ball on offense, but it's just for naught.
Yeah.
And this defense that was supposed to be so good, they get crushed every time they step out on the field. The Chiefs ran up 36 points on them like it was easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's this has been a rough year for the Steelers, and I think the writing is on the wall that Big Ben is gone. He probably should have left along with Drew Brees, but it is what it is. And now you kind of have to rebuild a little bit and find out who your next guy is going to be. And I think that's going to be difficult to do unless they land, a quarterback in the offseason that's already, a veteran or whatever. So that'll be another interesting thing to look out for, is where the Steelers end up as far as talent on their team, because I think you're right. They do have a lot of questions and a lot of weird drama on that team, which I don't know whose fault that is. I don't know if it's anybody's fault necessarily. A lot of people are kind of questioning Mike Tomlin now at this point, but I think he's pretty solid in his role. So we'll just have to see who they end up with as far as their next quarterback. I think that's just a huge question.
The quarterback question is going to be a big one. Of course, they know that Mason Rudolph is not the quarterback of the future of that team. What do they have in Dwayne Haskins? Who knows? He may be, a good bridge, somebody that can get a good running attack going with Najee Harris and him and try to get some kind of spark. But I think they need to be one of these teams that's looking at one of these potential movers as far as quarterbacks are concerned and try to bring in somebody, whether they can entice Aaron Rodgers to leave Green Bay. That would be a huge move for them. But is Aaron Rodgers going to want to come and put up with guys like Chase Claypool and Juju Smith-Schuster? I don't think so. So they would probably have to work out a deal to try to bring in Devontae Adams as well, because they're going to try to stay a tandem. Who knows? It'll be interesting to see. Like I said, this year's quarterback shakeup is going to be one for the record books for sure.
Yeah. I expect this offseason to be pretty interesting. The Aaron Rodgers situation is another interesting one. I mean, at the beginning of this year, I think we all assumed that he was out of there, and He has had some success there. They've been good, but I don't know if that's enough to sway him into staying. I mean, I guess he could look around the league and say, you know what, maybe the grass isn't greener on the other side. Maybe I do have it pretty good here, but he might just have such a sour taste in his mouth for that organization and the way they've treated free agency and the drafts by not really giving him much to work with, that he's just ready to be done with it all. So a very interesting situation there for him.
Yeah, I personally don't think Aaron Rodgers leaves Green Bay. I think he looks back and he's sitting there at 12-3 right now, on the way to a first seed in the NFC, which has been very competitive this season. And he's going to be able to host playoff games at Lambeau. I think there's no way that he leaves the Packers, even with that sour taste in his mouth. He knows, looking around, there's nowhere else that's any better.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's going to be very hard to move the package of Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams together, because I don't think the Packers want to give them both up. And I think the asking price for that is going to be pretty significant. So you might be right. We might be looking at Aaron Rodgers staying with all this drama that was caused. And maybe this just kind of woke up the Packers front office and said, you know what, we do have a top level quarterback here. We're successful every year for the past couple of years now, and we're just this close to making a Super Bowl. And maybe we should try to keep this guy happy so we can keep this winning going for as long as we can.
And this could very well be their year for a Super Bowl. I mean, I look around the NFC and there are some good teams out there. The Bucs are a good team, but they're beat up. Godwin's out for the year. I just saw that Mike Evans was placed on the COVID list for this upcoming week. Who knows if he makes the game or not? You look around the Rams, they have a good squad there, but are they going to be able to make a big run? The Cardinals look like they're doing Cardinals things and falling flat towards the end of the year. The 49ers, they're clinging to their playoff hopes. In fact, tonight's game, if the New Orleans Saints win, that leapfrogs them to be ahead of the 49ers to knock them out of the playoffs. So there's a lot riding on this game for 49er fans. They're all cheering for the Dolphins tonight. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. The NFC, it'll be an interesting bracket. Brandon's saying that it's going to be a very good bracket. It'll be an interesting bracket. I think there are only about 4 really good teams in the NFC, and then the rest are just going to be there. But it is what it is. He's saying his Rams are back.
I was going to ask you what you thought of that.
They definitely look like they've gotten better. They were rolling, and then the injury to Robert Woods happened. And I think that was the biggest kink in their entire season, was whenever Robert Woods went down with his ACL tear. Bringing in Odell Beckham that same week, they had to try to figure out some new chemistry. Since they've kind of got it going, they look good. Matt Stafford, as I said at the very beginning of the season, would be a great quarterback for the Rams this year. And, go ahead and toot my own horn a little bit. I also said that on our wide receivers episode, when we were previewing wide receivers, I said that I wanted any wide receiver from Los Angeles, whether it be Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, or any of the Chargers guys as well. But I said that primarily because I thought Stafford was going to be such a hit for the Rams. And look at what Cooper Kupp has done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, huge there. And I think the pickup of Matt Stafford was huge for them as well. You got a legitimate quarterback who was just in need of a good team. And I think that's been solidified this year, that Matt Stafford is the real deal. He was just stuck in Detroit where everything sucks, apparently. As far as the Rams being back, that's a bit of a stretch. I agree with you that they figured some things out and they're doing better, but I'm not ready to say that they're just immediately going to steamroll everyone in the playoffs and march on to the Super Bowl. I think they could be beaten by the likes of the Packers. Anything can happen in the playoffs, I think. And I'm excited to see what actually comes out of the NFC, because like you said, there's about 4 teams that have an actual chance, the Bucs, the Packers, the Rams, whoever else you want to throw in there. But I don't know. We all know that Tom Brady really, really thrives and shines in those playoff type moments, and he's been there 300 million times. So you can never really count them out, even though they have had injuries and some issues. So it's an interesting little road we have going down the stretch of the final part of the season and then into the playoffs.
Yeah, that one team that you left off that I say is the 4 good teams in the NFC and it pains me to even say it, but the Dallas Cowboys, they could make a decent run this year. I know the NFC East is what it is, but the Cowboys are still sitting at 11-4, and they're capable of scoring a lot of points, and their defense with the addition of Micah Parsons has looked very dominant.
Yeah, for sure.
Over on the AFC side of things, like it's everybody's pretty much even in the AFC. So I think that will be the better bracket for playoffs because anything could happen. It'll be like in our fantasy league when the 8 seed was able to upset the 1 seed. I could see something like that happening in the AFC side of the house because we've had 4 different number 1 seeds in the past month and a half. Because teams are winning and losing and rearranging. And now all of a sudden, if the Dolphins can surge and just win out, they can be in the playoffs after starting 1-6. This season makes no sense.
Yeah.
So it is what it is. The Colts have a legit shot. You know, we said it a couple weeks ago that might be the team to beat in the AFC, and that they're rolling. You know, they are built for cold weather. They're built for the playoffs.
Yep. Rely on that running game. A lot of people have questions about Carson Wentz and can you trust him to lead your team down a playoff run, which I definitely agree with those questions. But what if they don't need to? What if all they can do to succeed is run the ball? That's scary. That's scary to think about because, like you said, that's the cold weather game plan. And I think Jonathan Taylor can absolutely do that. You might not need Carson Wentz to be the game-winning quarterback or to make the game-winning play if you can just control the game from the ground. So I think the Colts are probably the most sneakiest team coming up to the playoffs. And I think the AFC is just completely up in the air. Wild conference right there.
I don't even think they're sneaky anymore. I think everybody sees them coming. They just don't know what to do about it.
Yeah, good point.
Jared asked, will the Miami Dolphins make the playoffs? What do you think?
If I had to say right now, I'll probably say no. I think they're probably going to either get screwed out of it or screw it up somehow. Because I think it's going to be difficult for 3 teams out of the AFC East to make it. It could happen. But like you said, they'd have to win out. And I don't know their schedule for the rest of the year. Is this it?
I just threw it up on the screen as you were saying that. Yeah. They've got the Saints tonight in New Orleans, and then they have the Titans in Tennessee, and then the Patriots come to town for the last game of the season in January. I don't know that they would have to knock off at least 2 playoff teams in order to have a shot at it. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be rough. It's going to be a tough stretch for them. If they win out, then they deserve it. I'll say that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to come from 1-6, like you said, to now we're talking about them potentially making the playoffs is huge. And they've had their struggles this year, and Tua has been in and out, and just all the things that happen. Hats off to them. I mean, they are finally a good team that is not just floundering after number 1 draft pick after number 1 draft pick like they have been for quite a while. So I would be very shocked if they won out and made the playoffs because I think the Saints tonight are going to be difficult, and I think the Patriots are going to be difficult. I give them the nod against the Titans because they're banged up and about useless without Derrick Henry. But still, that's going to be a difficult task for them to win out.
This is a Titans team that just beat the 49ers, and they've got AJ Brown back, and they got Juju back, or not Juju, but Julio Jones back. So they do have some weapons again, but it's putting it on Tannehill to have to win games, and that's where it ultimately gets hard for the Titans. The game against New Orleans, I think, is their best chance to win a game, actually, of the 3, because of the fact that New Orleans is banged up. They've got a lot of players on the COVID protocol list right now, and they're starting a 4th string quarterback who's a rookie, making his first ever NFL start. So it could be an interesting one on Monday Night Football tonight.
Yeah, that's going to be quite an interesting one. It's the bang up game of the week because, I mean, everybody's banged up on both sides of that one. I'm interested to see what Kamara can do because I really think the Saints need a good game out of him. And I think he needs to be a heavy run presence. Obviously, he is a dual threat out of the backfield, but I think if they can establish the run game early, that'll be their best chance for success because, like you said, they're both banged up. So it's really anybody's game whenever you're not solidified with your starters.
I agree. It will be interesting to see if Kamara is able to kind of put the team on his back, much like Jonathan Taylor has been doing, much like Nick Chubb does for the Browns. It will be interesting to see how they get Kamara involved in the offense. Last week, he was pretty much non-existent coming off of his knee injury. Now he's had another week of practice, another week of testing out that knee. We'll see how he does tonight. JC Day was asking how we feel about the possible leave from Russell Wilson. We mentioned it earlier that could be part of the quarterback shakeup. What do you think about that? Do you think he's a guy that will ultimately be on the move?
I think so. Where he ends up, it's hard to say at this point, but I do think that he's about done in Seattle. It doesn't look like they have what they once did. I don't know if he's unhappy with how he's been treated there or whatever, but it just doesn't seem like they don't have the same fire. He doesn't have the same just kind of, I don't know, vigor that he once had. And that might be just because of age or whatever it is. But I think he's just ready for a change. And I think that entire Seattle team is just they're still kind of clinging on to what they once were. And they just aren't that anymore. And they've had a hard time finding who they are. I mean, they've had a couple good players come through. Obviously, comes to mind is DK Metcalf has probably been the best player that they've gotten in quite some time. When healthy, they do have a good running back, but I think he's questionable now at this point. So it's a tough outing there in Seattle for Russell Wilson because I think it's clear now that he cannot do it all on his own. It seems like every year he's in MVP talks to start things off, and then it just kind of falls off for whatever reason. I don't know if that's his fault or what, but I do know that they really don't have a defense to speak of, and that was something that they obviously were absolutely known for quite a while, but those days are long gone. So I just think Russell Wilson is almost that last piece of that old, 2015 era Seattle Seahawks team that's still around. And it's not the same anymore. And it's just not going to work. I really don't think it is.
No, I agree with you. And I think he probably will be on the move. JC saying that he would love to see him in Pittsburgh, but I don't think that's ultimately going to be his destination. If I were to bet on any team being able to acquire the services of Russell Wilson, I would say that it'll probably be the New Orleans Saints. That's a team that they know already that they have questions all over the quarterback position. They most likely won't be bringing back Jameis Winston. He was on a 1-year deal. He tore his ACL. He played decent, but are you going to take another chance on a guy coming back off of this injury, giving him the keys to the kingdom, not knowing for sure if he's ever going to be the same? I don't think so. We know Taysom Hill is not the quarterback that they thought that he might be. And then, we got this rookie Ian Book that's making his debut tonight. I don't think that he's going to go out there in the next 2 or 3 games and light the world on fire enough to be able to justify giving him the keys to the kingdom. And then there's Trevor Siemian, who's a journeyman in the NFL anyway. He's not the guy that you're going to invest the future in. So if any team out there is going to make a big play at him, I think it's the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah. I mean, I hate to break JC's heart here, but if I'm a quarterback looking to find a new home, I don't know that the Steelers are high on my list. I think they have issues. And I don't know that those can necessarily be fixed by one quarterback just kind of coming in and trying to replace Big Ben. I think they have some things they need to work out. I think Najee Harris needs to be the cornerstone of that offense, and whatever quarterback comes in should probably be a more mobile quarterback to complement that. And then you've got to figure out something with these wide receivers. I mean, it's absurd that the stuff that they're doing. I mean, I think we all saw the clip of Chase Claypool kind of clowning around whenever they needed to get that ball off and keep the ball moving because the clock was still ticking. That's a rookie mistake. And at this level, you can't afford those kind of things if you're trying to be a Super Bowl contender. I understand what they're doing with their personal brands and stuff, and that's just the way that sports are these days. But when you're on the field, I mean, you have the job that got you to your level of success right in front of you, and I think that's what you should be focused on. If during the week, not on Sundays, you want to be a TikTok star, that's up to you. But I think trying to just be a showman whenever there's important things going on that determine whether you win or lose is a bad look from one of your two top level wide receivers on that team. And it's just bad. And if I'm a quarterback, I don't want to deal with that, especially a veteran who's trying to finish out the last part of his career with some success, maybe a potential return to the Super Bowl. I don't think that Juju and Chase Claypool are the guys that are going to get you there.
No, and JC brought up a good point earlier that Juju's gone after this season anyway, and they're most likely not going to bring him back for another extension. So that they'll be rebuilding and restructuring in Pittsburgh. I don't think bringing in an aging quarterback, a veteran quarterback like Russell Wilson, is the first move you make in a rebuild.
Yeah.
Brandon saying, don't count out Denver to land Russell Wilson. That would be an interesting situation there. And Jared said that Denver is a great possibility. They're a team in the playoff discussion under Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy Bridgewater, another guy that played very well when he was in New Orleans to get his big contract with the Carolina Panthers. They subsequently moved on from him and traded him out to Denver. I've always said that Teddy Bridgewater is a good quarterback. In fact, you'll remember, Zach, I was campaigning for him to be the guy that was signed in New England ahead of them signing Cam Newton.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted Teddy Bridgewater to come up there and play for the Patriots, but that ultimately never happened. He got the payload from the Carolina Panthers instead. It is what it is. He's still a winner in my book.
Yeah, 100%. He's the guy who, aside from his time in Minnesota, has just kind of been bouncing around and never really had an establishment other than, I guess, the Panthers, but they let him go too quick, I think. It'll be interesting to see what actually happens with him there in Denver. Do they stick with him and do they kind of continue on his success here, or do they try to pick up one of those big names that could be moving around? You mentioned the Panthers, and that brings up another guy that I have questions about. What's going to happen with Cam Newton?
If you listen to the post-game interviews that happened after their most recent loss, it almost sounded like a pseudo retirement speech that he was given.
It was strange.
Of course, Cam Newton, he does have a way of speaking that's kind of in code or like real mysterious in a way, but it sounded like he was like, okay, maybe I don't have it anymore. And there's been some rumblings going around in the Panthers rumor mill that Cam's going to be back on the bench and they're going to bring back in Sam Darnold as their starter for the rest of the season. And then at that point, they'll probably just cut Cam at the end of the season, and then he'll be back to his free agency life. And, who knows how long he sits as a free agent before he's picked up again.
I think if you look at this year, whenever the Patriots cut him and he sat on the bench in free agency for that long, and then his old team decided to take a shot at bringing him back because Sam Darnold wasn't cutting the mustard. That was his basically last chance to make an impact. He did have a good game for them for that first game, and then it was all downhill from there.
And that's why I said earlier, like, you really can't judge guys like Huntley on one game, because anybody can go out there and have one good game. The defense is planning for somebody else, and then all of a sudden it put somebody else in there. It changes the defensive schemes, what they practice for, what they plan for. So yeah, anybody can have one good game. Is it sustainable? Absolutely not.
I call it the Mike White effect. And if you remember, the Jets played Mike White on just some random, I can't remember, game because Zach Wilson was injured and he tore it up. I mean, he did great, and my dumbass picked him up off of the bench, off the waiver wire in fantasy. He did absolutely nothing and went back to the bench. I think guys like Huntley and just random people in the league can do that from time to time. A blind squirrel gets a nut every now and then. And I think that happens with these guys, especially with guys that come out of nowhere. Defenses have a game plan against a certain quarterback, and then when that quarterback doesn't show up, it can kind of catch them off guard. And I kind of think that might have been what Cam found when he came back to Carolina, was that they just weren't necessarily ready for a Cam Newton style quarterback. They were kind of expecting a Sam Darnold guy, and then he didn't show up. They got Cam Newton, and it just so happened that he found success, and then it never really happened again. So I definitely would hold some judgment on saying that Huntley needs a job somewhere or whatever, because you need to kind of prove yourself before I'm ready to say that, because
absolutely
it could be the Mike White effect.
And, you talking about Mike White and talking about Cam Newton, those are some of the better sports stories that took place in the 2021 NFL season. But there were a lot of other stories that kind of got the needle moving and had us talking about it. Early in 2021, we found out about the Desean Watson situation, and that was a huge topic of conversation for a lot of people, because what was going to happen with Desean Watson? What is still going to happen with Desean Watson? He ultimately didn't play at all this year. He was never suspended, never formally charged with anything, never had any kind of legal ramifications, but he still never played this entire season. And this is a guy that could be brought up once again in the moving and shaking of the offseason for 2022, pending he isn't charged with anything.
So does that mean that he was basically just a sit out for this year? Like he pulled a Le'Veon Bell?
Yes, I think so. He said that he didn't want to play for the Texans, and then with all the off the field stuff, it was kind of like, well, we're not going to play him anyway. So they plugged in Tyrod Taylor, which I'm glad that he finally got a chance to play.
Yeah,
because that guy, he's had a very unfortunate career. But with the Desean situation, I think that the Texans were like, all right, well, we need to get used to what life is going to be like without Desean Watson. Whether we trade him or not, he doesn't want to play here. So if he's going to strong arm us and pull a Le'Veon Bell situation and just not play, we need to be able to plan for that accordingly. Of course, they may end up losing him, to the Texas prison system at some point. So who knows what's actually going to happen. But if he gets traded somewhere or ends up getting cleared of all this and is available, I think he gets plugged in and makes an impact on a team even after sitting out this year.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think he's an immediate impact on wherever he ends up, if he is able to play and not in prison. Another very interesting thing that we will see unfold. As far as I remember, I think his trial or whatever is supposed to start in February.
That's correct.
I'm sure we'll all be following that as it unfolds throughout the off season. And if he can, find his way back from all this not guilty, then I would imagine that's probably what kept a team from really going hard after him this year, because I think if you remember, the Dolphins were pretty close to signing a deal, but they wanted some contingencies on him being available. And if he wasn't available, that X amount of things were going to happen, and the Texans didn't want to do that. I really think that's what held teams back from going all in on him this year, was that he might not be available to play for a couple of years if he's in prison. So if he can come back from that and be good to go, you will see a lot of teams just chomping at the bit to try to get him to come over.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Dolphins. They were definitely shopping around whenever they were sitting at 1-6 and didn't really look like they were going to be able to put together anything. Now that they're sitting there at 7-7 and on the cusp of being a playoff contender, it makes you wonder if they do make a run and end up in the playoffs, do they just ride with Tua?
It's a great question. I think they're kind of lucky to be where they are, and I don't know if Tua is the answer long term, but I also don't know if he's not the answer. He's always had an injury or an issue to deal with, which is understandable. I mean, we are talking about the game of football here, so it's rare that players come out unscathed, especially the mobile quarterback types. So lots of questions there. I mean, if the Desean Watson deal comes back around, how do you not jump on that? Because I mean, I think he's really the piece that could really put them over the edge. I think Tua is serviceable and he at times can be good, but kind of like Baker Mayfield, he can also lose you games too if things get too far away from him, if it starts to fall apart, if he gets an injury. He's not the most reliable guy out there. So
yeah, that's true. And our buddy Jared, he's said it before that with Tua, they might be a fringe playoff team, but with Deshaun Watson, they're potentially AFC championship level team.
Right.
He would elevate that team to a new level if he's able to play. So it is what it is with that one. Another one of the big stories that we followed a lot this season and in 2021 was the entire Urban Meyer saga. What's he going to do coming from the college ranks to the NFL, coming from Ohio State to the Jacksonville Jaguars, getting the number 1 overall draft pick in Trevor Lawrence, and is he going to be able to bring his winning resume to a losing franchise? Well, we got our answer in just a few short weeks, and he already has been fired after the going to Columbus and partying with the random woman that was not his wife, and then kicking a kicker and everything that happened with the Urban Meyer situation there in Jacksonville. And wow, that burned out a lot quicker than I thought that it would. And it crashed and burned quicker than the Detroit Lions with the number 1 pick this year.
Yeah, man. What a bad look for him just out on a personal level. I think we all got to see, if you didn't know before that he was a questionable guy, I think you absolutely know that now. He just never seemed to care about the organization. We all saw the clip of him partying in Columbus, but you and I talked about it. I think the big thing to take away from that was the fact that he didn't fly back with the team. He decided to stay. He drove from Cincinnati to Columbus to party at his bar. Weird decision coming from a head coach who's supposed to be the leader of this team and all that stuff. I really do think that from his Florida days, where he made a name for himself, his ego has grown and grown since then, and got to be the head coach of Ohio State, very prestigious school, won the very first college football playoff championship. And then ever since then, he's just been riding on the coattails of prior success. And that's what you saw this year. He brought nothing to the table when it came to the game plan and the success of that team. And I think he might be hard pressed to find a job after this. I think there's probably some college team out there that would hire him simply because he has a name, but it won't be one of the prestigious schools that's looking to make it into the playoff, because he has nothing to claim anymore. He has no credibility anymore. And this year was just, I mean, egregious for not only his off the field transgressions, but just his what he put out onto the field. I get it. The Jags aren't the greatest team in the world, but you're talking about Trevor Lawrence, who's number one pick and should have been the start of a new era there in Jacksonville, and couldn't get anything going with him.
Yeah, of course, the instant injury to Travis Etienne didn't help out their season at all, but they still had James Robinson, who was serviceable at running back and made nothing happen out of it. Brandon is saying that he was like that in college too. The difference is in college, he could kind of get away with pushing around these kids who are dependent on doing whatever he says to keep their scholarships and keep their playing time. When you're in the NFL, these are grown men. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to put up with his nonsense. They're here, they're getting paid to play the game. This is their job, their livelihood. And they're not going to let you come in there and treat them bad and screw it up for them. The NFL Players Association is a union. It's like any job that has a union. If you have a grievance, you can make some changes happen. So it's just a completely different world. And he went from messing with boys to men, and it did not work out very well for him at all. You mentioned potential other jobs where Urban Meyer could land. To me, the best job where he could possibly land is Bishop Sycamore High School, because that seems like the only place that's going to hire a clown like that. Of course, the Bishop Sycamore was another one of the big stories that kind of took the internet by storm this year. And, we had our fun with that, laughing and cutting up with the Sportszilla guys about the Bishop's Sycamore and how funny that was that they duped ESPN into getting on primetime. It was pretty hilarious.
Man, what a crazy saga that was. I mean, kind of just came out of nowhere, and they played a game on, I think it was like ESPN2 or something like that. And it was a high school football game, and it just snowballed from there. I mean, we saw the articles coming out that some players were like in their 30s or whatever, and it wasn't even a real school. And then it just blew up from there. That was a wild thing to have happen in sports, especially in this day and age when it's so easy to Google things and look up stuff. And how did no one from ESPN figure that out before it blew up on the internet?
Well, they certainly did not check with us before they threw them on TV, because we could have found out very quickly that's not even a real school. They don't even have any staff on their website. They looking back at it, you can see like, wow, there are holes all in this story, but they never checked with us beforehand. So that's on them.
Yeah.
We're running low on time, Zach. So let's go ahead and move into our fantasy studs and duds for the week. Get that out of the way. And, for me, we already talked about him a little bit earlier in the broadcast, but for my quarterback stud, Mr. Joe Burrow, with 38.1 fantasy points, 525 yards passing, 4 touchdowns. And like I mentioned earlier, he is now 4th most passing yards in a single game. He killed it.
Yeah, absolutely killed it. I think that is the obvious answer here, and he just blew it out of the water. One guy I do want to talk about that has been on our dud list a little bit and did have a good game this week is Dak Prescott. He posted up 31 points, which is a huge game for him, all things considered. 4 touchdowns out of him was great, 330 yards. And they beat the Washington football team 56-14. So that huge week from Dak Prescott.
Yeah, beat the dog crap out of them for sure. And it was funny that the Washington football team brought their own heated benches and all that stuff to kind of I guess repay the favor that the Cowboys brought to them, and then they ended up getting destroyed. So it turned into a pretty funny moment for the internet. My dud quarterback is the quarterback of the Washington football team, Taylor Heineke. He had 4.74 fantasy points. Now, I don't know a lot of people who were plugging him in, banking on him to win them their fantasy matchup this week. But if you were, you got disappointed severely with only 121 passing yards, 1 touchdown, but 2 interceptions.
Ooh, rough. Yeah, sadly, I have both of our dud quarterbacks on my team here, and I started Mac Jones and was not happy with the results. He posted up 5.1 points this week, 2 interceptions and 145 yards. He had a rough day against Buffalo, which I kind of thought could go either way. Maybe he could he could have some success against them, and it just wasn't the case.
Yeah, no, the only guy that had any success for the New England Patriots is my running back stud of the week, Damien Harris. He had 28.3 fantasy points, 103 yards, and 3 touchdowns. They definitely are able to run the ball at will against the Buffalo Bills, but passing, that's been a completely different conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. My running back stud this week is going to be Joe Mixon. He posted up 31.5 points, 2 touchdowns, and 65 yards. And let's see if he was in the passing game. Carried the ball 17 times. That got him his 58 yards. Only 1 target for a 2-yard reception. So, yeah, he
not much.
He made his money running and with those 2 touchdowns. But, yeah, big game from him. Points-wise,
yeah, for sure. My dud was a guy that was on your team, and that's Miles Sanders. 5.8 points, 45 yards rushing, and only 1 catch for 3 yards. And this is coming off of a week where he was over 100 yards last week, and then he comes out this week and is not able to run the ball at all. And that seems to be the season for the Philadelphia Eagles. They're really, really good at doing something, and then they suck at doing something.
Yeah.
Even though they won the game 34-10.
Right. And that was so frustrating because last week I benched him for Penny, and he balled out that week.
Penny balled out this week.
Yeah. That just goes to show you that this year of fantasy football was just out of this world. My dud this week is going to be Jonathan Taylor. He posted 10.8 points, only was able to get 108 yards, no touchdowns. So
only 108 yards.
I know, right? How funny is that? That's a bad game for the guy. But I mean, when you're talking about a guy who put up 5 touchdowns and almost put up a 50-point game or whatever that was, not a great week against the Arizona Cardinals.
What's his average per game? Do you have that there?
Points per game?
Yep. He's got to be over 20 at this point.
I'd have to search it. Give us your stud wide receiver and I'll check it out.
All right. My stud wide receiver for the week was A.J. Brown for the Tennessee Titans with 31.5 points. He had 11 receptions for 145 yards and a touchdown. First game back for Ryan Tannehill, and he made himself a very big target for him.
Nice. Well, you were really quick.
No worries. It doesn't really matter. Okay. If you want to just move on.
Okay. What's my wide receiver stud? Sorry, now I have to get back to where I was at. Who did you say? Sorry.
A.J. Brown.
Okay, gotcha. I just didn't want to double up. My stud this week is going to be Deebo Samuel for the 49ers. Guy I don't really hear much about. We don't really talk about, but this week he posted up 28 points, 9 receptions for 159 yards. Damn good game out of him for a guy who really isn't on people's radar as far as I can tell. So if you plugged him in, it looks like in our league he was a wide receiver too. So if you plugged him in, that's a solid game.
Yeah, Deebo has had a pretty good season, and both of these boom wide receivers are on Harvey's team. So, yeah,
he's got us.
Looks like 22. Yep. Yeah. I had it pulled up as well. He's got a 22.8 average per game. So, yeah, 10 points for him is kind of a bust.
Yeah.
My dud wide receiver is Van Jefferson with 1.6 fantasy points. He only had 1 reception for 6 yards, and he was targeted 6 times. This is a guy for the Rams that a lot of people expected would have a big last half of the season, especially after Robert Woods went down. He's kind of been insignificant going forward.
Yeah, that sucks. My dud really went big, and he said he wanted to be dud of the week. Tyreek Hill just did not show up for whatever reason. 3.9 points, only 2 receptions for 19 yards, and it just a huge shocker for me. And I think maybe the Travis Kelce not being there, maybe that just allowed defenses to only focus on Tyreek Hill, and they didn't really have to worry about much of anything else because he just was a non-factor in the game, which sucks because KC tore it up and scored 36 points, and he just was not a part of it at all.
Yeah, Hardman was big. Gore was big for the Chiefs. But yeah, it was weird. I thought with Kelsey not being there, Hill would be the primary target. It looked good on the first drive because he caught 2 balls on that first drive. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire went out with a shoulder injury. And it just seemed like everything was a lot different after that. JC saying that his dud was Tony Pollard with only 7 points. People have gotten to expect a little bit more out of Tony Pollard this season, haven't they?
Yeah. I wonder what he would be able to do if he was a solid RB1 somewhere. I think if he wants a real shot at that, he probably has to move on from Dallas if they even can do that. I don't know what his contract is or whatever, but yeah, I don't know if we can necessarily expect that out of him just consistently because he does have to contend with Zeke.
Yeah. And we'll see what happens. That's another little shakeup that I could see happening in the offseason is what the Cowboys are going to do with their running back situation.
Mm-hmm.
But Zach, let's take the last few minutes that we have here to kind of look back on the Nest podcast for 2021. We had a pretty good year in and of itself with our predictions and our hot take calls and stuff like that. Starting off, when we had Brandon Mateer on back the night of the college football championship, I made the shot in the dark prediction that Mac Jones would be drafted by the New England Patriots at number 15. And a lot of people at the time said, no, there's no way that that's going to happen. Mac Jones is going to go much earlier than that, or the Patriots are going to have to move up to get a quarterback. Lo and behold, Mac Jones fell to the Patriots at number 15. So that was our first big, hey, we called that of the year. Then in our MLB prediction episodes, Zach nailed the American League Rookie of the Year, and he predicted the National League Rookie of the Year finalist. So you got all the rookies. So I'm going to be looking for you next year to find out who the up and coming studs are that I need to be paying attention to.
Gotcha.
And on that same episode, I nailed the American League MVP as well.
Yeah, and honestly, I think we gloss over the fact that was a pretty bold pick there at the beginning. Even before the baseball season kicked off, because you have to remember that Shohei was questionable because of his injury past, and could he do both successfully without taxing his body and getting another injury? And that's what I thought. I don't see how a guy who has already had Tommy John and has already had some issues be able to pitch at a high level and bat at a high level. He proved me wrong, and boy, did he really earn that MVP title. I think more than anybody in a lot of leagues, he really did earn that MVP title, because playing both sides of the sport of baseball like that is really insane to do. And he can do both at an absolutely high level.
Yeah, National League pitchers, they have to bat also, and it's not uncommon to see them bat if you're a National League fan, but to see a pitcher go out there and hit 40 home runs in a season while also keeping his ERA below 4, that's pretty remarkable, and definitely worth MVP. And, we made some NFL predictions. Like I predicted Stafford having a good season and Cooper Kupp having a breakout year with him as quarterback. We've made our predictions. I don't necessarily think my MVP prediction is going to come true, because I said Josh Allen would be the MVP. Turns out we don't know who's going to be the MVP of the NFL this year. It may end up being a running back for the first time in I don't know how many years, but it's definitely going to be one to watch and keep an eye on. And we had a lot of special guests this week, and I want to take time or this year, and I want to take time to kind of tip the cap to all of those special guests that we had on during 2021. Of course, a couple weeks ago, we had Deuce Morton on for the second time, and he's a phenomenal guest. I love having him on and welcome him back at any time. But we also got to know some of the Locked On podcasters. Most notably, we spoke with Lucas Smith from Locked On Cardinals and got to have him on a few times and got to be friends with him, and he's a really good guy. We also had Javier Reyes from the Locked On Padres podcast. Had him on a few times, and he's a great guy, funny guy, and really cool to have on and talk about Padres baseball. We had Jeff Snyder from Locked On Dodgers and Stacy Gasulias from Locked On Yankees. Had them all come on during our spring training episodes when we were breaking down each division and talking about their respective teams. We also had the host of the Boston Balling podcast, Gabby Hurlbutt. She was an ESPN executive producer and somebody that has a lot more clout than we have. And was able to come on here and talk about Boston Red Sox baseball and talk about, what she thought was going to happen in the American League East. And it was great to just sit down and be able to chat with these people and get to know them a little bit. Of course, we also got to tip the cap to the Pesky Report and Brad Chandler. He's been on several times talking about baseball. Our good friends Adam Ballesteros, Harvey Reed, Jim Surdom, JC Day also joining us on the podcast several times, and several more that we had on throughout the years. Of course, a big shout out to our friends Jared Sneed and Ryan Gaskins from the Sportszilla podcast. Love having those guys on. Love to have them back on anytime in the future. Our chat on our group thread is always going off the hook. And if we could just take the text thread and throw it on a live podcast, I know it would be entertainment. And I would love to have those guys on here. All four of us on the screen at one time would be a lot of fun. That I think that's all the people that I can think of off the top of my head, at least. And I look forward to having more shows and more conversations in 2022.
Yeah, man, I gotta say this year was a fun one. I really enjoyed the Locked On people that we got. I think that's a really special network. So if you're a fan of specific teams out there and you want a more in-depth podcast to listen to for your specific teams, check out the Locked On Network. They have a podcast for just about every major league sports team out there. Obviously, myself as a St. Louis Cardinals fan, I really got into Locked On Cardinals, and I think that show is brilliantly done. I loved having him on, and I think this year was a good one for us. And we met a lot of people through the internet. That was a really fun thing to do, and man, a lot of people out there that, like you said, have more clout than us. I really do appreciate them for taking time and coming in to chat with our little show. And hopefully we can do some of that again this next coming year and see what we can bring to the table. But it's too much fun. And I really do enjoy this weekly show where we get to share our thoughts and just kind of talk about the world of sports and share our opinions on it. And I enjoy the fact that people have, come on and chatted with us in the comments. That really does drive the conversation and keep it going. It seems like JC has been around this whole show for today. So thanks for hanging out with us, because I think that is really what drives us to continue to do it and to put more effort into it, and everything is actually seeing that the viewership wants us to keep doing it and hear our stupid opinions about stuff.
Yeah. We by no means are experts on any of this stuff. We're just regular guys that happen to really like sports and have figured out somehow, some way to produce a show from our respective corners of the country. And for those that don't know, Zach's in Missouri and I'm in Florida. So the entire duration of our podcast, we've never even been in the same room. So it's been a challenge for us to do this for the past almost 4 years at this point.
Yeah.
So it's been a lot, and we enjoy it. We love doing it. And we definitely appreciate everyone that has watched, contributed, listened, and all this stuff. And one of the big highlights for this year was starting Champ to Champ. I've really enjoyed our fantasy football focus that we did Of course, we were doing it every Saturday night during the fantasy football season. And I hope that we can continue that next season as well, maybe with some slight changes to the overall show and to everything. I would love to get more people on a reoccurring, cycle, so that we could have more opinions and more conversation about fantasy football, because everybody that watches our show and everybody that talks to us has a fantasy football team, and they all have their own opinions. Maybe we don't think about it. So,
right.
And here we already got one of the buds are already chiming in. Well, and he's one of the guys that I would love to have on here all the time, because he's a very smart individual and gets our sarcasm and our sense of humor as well. So it would be great to have anybody like that on here. But let's jump off here, because Monday Night Football is about to start. I've got to go cheer for 15 points so that I can beat you in fantasy football this week, Zach, and go on to the championship round next week, and hopefully keep this belt right here with me.
Man, if you have to mail that to Harvey, it is going to be a heartbreaker.
Tell me about it. It definitely will, because I've grown quite accustomed to having it right here with me every week, and it will not be fun to have to send it somewhere else. But you know what? It's still here for the time being, so I'm going to keep showing it. Guys, we appreciate all of you for commenting along, for all the likes and comments and the views tonight. We hope that you'll share our episode out with your friends. Tell them, like, hey, I've got these guys that they produce a show every single week, and they're better than anything that you'll see on ESPN. So we would appreciate that, and we would appreciate you guys coming back next week right here for the Nest Podcast. We out.